agric to feed these people, but also industrializing to produce the finished goods that we need to power our economy. And also job creation. Job creation, and we get to understand it, even further when I talk about why does we power our economy. We need an economy that actually works and delivers the jobs and prosperity for our people. Not just an economy that grows for a few and does not necessarily even create a job for the Ghanaians. And that's why we also talk about it. It's about building an economy that works for everyone, every hour of the day. So social justice is important. That's the direction that the president gives us. And then on May 28th, when he met the private sector folks, he also talked about, he gave a distinction of what the 24-hour economy is as a destination and what it is as a program. So as a destination, and this is what a lot of us actually talk about when we talk about 24-hour economy. As a destination, you're looking at getting to a stage where you have an economy that is so productive that you are utilizing every single resource that's available to you. And where you've optimized the utilization of your resources such that just a one-shift economy does not give you the best. Where you need to basically operate in multiple shifts in order to be able to get the best out of what you have. So today, for instance, if you look at the Ghanaian economy, we are told that capacity utilization in the industrial sector is about 40%. Some are as low as about 10%. In that instance, you are not utilizing your resources very well. You want to get to a stage where within the 8 hours, we are utilizing 100% of the capacity available to us, and that we need additional shifts, and we need to utilize all the time available to us in order to be able. So you need to be able to produce 300 times what you produce today in 8 hours. That's the destination we are looking at, a destination where we are so productive and we are so efficient that we are optimizing the utilization of all resources. But to get there, you need a program. Right? And the program is what the 24-hour economy program is all about. Because see it as a journey. It's a journey to get to that destination where you have that optimal utilization of all your resources. And that journey requires us to be able to identify all the constraints that prevent us from building that economy and being able to take out those constraints so that we eventually get to that destination. And within the program, we've set for ourselves 6 key objectives. So the first one is that we want to significantly increase input self-reliance and reduce Ghana's vulnerability to external shocks. The second one is to facilitate, and let me talk a bit about the input self-reliance and the vulnerability to external shocks. When you look at our industry today, we're told that we import more than 50% of inputs for manufacturing in Ghana. And yet, we consume more than 90% of everything that we actually manufacture in Ghana. So what you have is a situation where, even in terms of the things we manufacture, we need to go outside, get inputs before we are able to manufacture. When it comes to agriculture, almost all the inputs that we use for agriculture, we are importing. Poultry, we import day-old chicks. We don't produce any day-old chicks. We import the seeds that we use for agriculture. So every single thing, we need to go out there and import. And COVID taught us one thing, that global supply chains can be disrupted. And if you don't build that resilience and that self-reliance, you're going to get to a stage where if anything happens on the global stage, Trump bombs Iran, then you start wondering, is this going to become a big news in Ghana? You don't want to get to that stage. You want to get to a stage where you are self-reliant. So one of our objectives here is to be able to build that input self-reliance. And then in doing that, also reduce our vulnerability. So build a certain level of resilience to external shocks. That's number one. Number two is facilitate the comprehensive integration of value chains to produce more of our needs. And this is also a very important objective for us, the integrated value chains. Because one of the things we realized whilst we were doing our analysis leading up to the development of this program was the realization that there are a lot of really good programs and projects scattered around in the ministries, departments, in the NGOs, private sector, and all of that. The problem we have, though, is one, you don't have a coordination across all of these. So you have things that are done in silos. And so the benefits, you don't see it translating into other, sectors. And then what you also then have is sometimes, because we haven't looked at the whole value chain and the implication of what we are doing, you solve one problem here and then you create another problem over here. And I'll illustrate with an example that we came across. There was a project to improve poultry production, local poultry production. And so Ministry of Agric, in doing this, imported 2 million birds, 2 million day-old chicks for the agric sector, for the poultry sector. Poultry farmers came to get it. They picked it because this was good, right? They were going to produce poultry. 6 weeks later, the poultry was ready, but this was the problem. At that time, the only processor that we had in this country was Darko Farms. And Darko Farms also, when the government announced this push for poultry, they also imported their own day-old chicks. And their day-old chicks were also ready for the market. So they couldn't process other people's day-old chicks. They had to process theirs. So people had their day-old chicks, or people had their matured poultry stay on additional 2-3 weeks before they could get processed, because Darko Farms had to finish theirs before they start working, processing anybody's. Then there was another problem. We hadn't thought about storage. At that time, there was no storage facility in Ghana. So when they started processing, they couldn't find any place to store it. So now you had farmers who had invested in poultry farms, who had, taken care of the poultry. They were ready. First, the poultry got ready later than it had to be. And now they had to sell it cheap, because if they don't sell it, there's nowhere to store it. That is because we didn't think of an integrated value chain approach. When we're bringing in the day-old chicks, we didn't think about, once you bring the day-old chicks, where would they be processed? What would be the offtake? All of that we didn't think about, right? Now, our program is looking at ensuring that today, when we are solving a problem, we don't only look at one part of it, we look at it all through the value chain. But also important, also integrate different value chains. Because when you talk about poultry, poultry needs feed, right? The feed will come from maize, will come from soybean, will come from fish meal. Those are other value chains that integrate with this poultry value chain to ensure that you are producing the poultry at the cost that is affordable. Because today, when you talk to our poultry farmers, they tell you feed is about 70% of the cost of producing the poultry. So if you bring all the poultry and you haven't thought about how do you produce the feed, essentially, you're not going to be able to get poultry at a price that's competitive. So that's why we talk about facilitating the comprehensive integration of value chains to produce more of our needs. Number 3, I don't think that requires too much explanation. Optimize the utilization of production resources, including human labor, power, natural resources, and capital to achieve high productivity, shared prosperity, and more balanced lives. Essentially, we want to make sure that we are optimizing the utilization of every single resource available to us. And to this, right, there's something that someone actually said, which continues to gnaw at me all the time. He said, one of the things he realized in Ghana is that you cannot move 10 meters without seeing something that is not excellent. And because we are surrounded by so many things that's not excellent. We take not being excellent for granted. And so we actually think being excellent is not the norm. The norm is not to be excellent. So we don't do everything to the best of its ability. So if we say we'll start at 11, no, it actually means we'll start at 11:30, 12, maybe 12:30, right? We don't optimize the utilization of everything that we have. Being excellent, part of being excellent is making sure that you are optimizing the resources that are available to you and getting the best out of it. And that's one of the things that we want to be able to get Ghana into, right? Where we have the ability to optimize the resources, but also we have the mindset to optimize the resources. Then 4 is increase the volume and types of production, and that's increase meaningful employment. So sometimes when you talk about production, increasing production, we are thinking about it not only in terms of outputs. So we need to increase the volume, but we also need to increase the quality of output so that our products are competitive globally. So increase the volume, increase the quality, increase the variety of outputs. And in the process, actually create jobs for our people. Number 5 is develop stable production surpluses based on marketing that scientifically assesses and penetrates concrete local, regional, and international markets. So here we're looking at developing, so producing enough for ourselves and producing enough so that we can also export. Today, for a lot of areas, when you actually see what we do is, and we talk to a lot of big agri people, their first focus is they are producing to export, not even producing to feed up ourselves. So you have a situation where even when we don't have enough to eat, we are looking at export. So we are not necessarily exporting our surpluses. We are exporting what we could be eating. We want to change that and get to the situation where we are exporting as much as possible our surpluses. There might be other places, in other situations where we are just producing to exports. But ultimately, we should be exporting sustainably. We should be exporting, the things that we've been able to produce enough of for ourselves, and not exporting the situation where you have today, where you have rubber. Our rubber manufacturing companies don't have enough rubber to feed their factories, and yet we are exporting all the raw rubber that we have. We don't want that situation. Okay. And then finally, we want to equip the Ghanaian productive sector with better attitudes to production and production relations and socio-cultural value solidarity. This is really about ensuring that we are building the right society. We are building the people with the right mindset. We are building the people with the right skills, and we are ensuring that the relationship between producers, the relation between producers and labor and all of that is one that is born out of respect and where you have equity in all of those relationships. You don't have a situation where an employer employs people and then, gives them 1-2% of the value that they generate and takes all of it. And then you have a big chunk of people who are underemployed or who are in vulnerable employment, and 1 or 2 big business people who are enjoying all of it. We don't want that. We want more fairer relationships, more equity, and then also the right mindset, the right skill sets in all of that. So that's our objective. You realize that if you take a look at the theory of change, and we've developed a theory of change that you can take a look at to understand basically what is the long-term objective of all of these things. So what's the long-term objective? What is the short-term objectives? How are we then looking to be able to get there? If you read the program document, you get to see the theory of change in a bit more detail. But what I'll focus here is just the 3 transformation pillars that we are looking to use for this research that we want to do. And the transformation pillars, the first one is production transformation. And I've spoken a bit about production. So here it's about increasing the volume, the variety, and the quality of outputs. The key sectors that we are looking at here is agriculture. We're looking at manufacturing, and I'll talk about the specific value chains in manufacturing. So agriculture, manufacturing, construction, culture. So actually viewing culture not just in terms of identity, but also in terms of its commercial and economic value. Then we have the supply chain and market systems efficiency as the transformation pillar number 2. And supply chains and market efficiency is important because what we realize when you do the analysis is that most of the price buildup in Ghana comes from our logistics systems. So we're actually reading one report that talked about the fact that if you pick a commodity on the markets of Ghana, up to 50 to 60% of the cost of that commodity can be attributed to the logistics, to the supply chain. The global average is about 15%. So it tells you how inefficient our supply chain systems are. We have terrible road systems. You know, if you're moving yams from Tamale to Accra, by the time you get to Accra, more than half of the yams are gone. We actually realize post-harvest losses for yam is about 70% in this country. That is too much, right? So part of what we are trying to do in supply chain and market systems efficiency is to ensure that we are building efficient supply chains that ensure that things move from farm gate to market, factory gate to market, in a timely manner, in a way that also does not cause price buildup. And finally, we have the human capital development, which is really because it's humans that power all of this. And in building this economy, we want to have people with the right skills and also the right mindset to be able. So the skills for today's economy, the skills for the economy of tomorrow, and the mindset of excellence, of patriotism. So when you talk about mindset, it's not just an of excellence, but also of patriotism. Because today, if you talk to a lot of young Ghanaians, their objective is so the government is doing a lot in terms of the macroeconomy. The Bank of Ghana is looking at monetary policy, finance ministry looking at the fiscal policy. There's so much that's happening there. But the macro also needs the micro. So if you build a strong macroeconomy, what you also need is you need the private sector to be able to come in a way that they take advantage of it. So a big part of what we are doing with the 24-hour economy program is to create the environment and create the mechanism by which the private sector can take advantage of the macroeconomy that we are building. And that's why we are private sector focused. And you will get to see when we talk about the financing, some of the ways we are looking at to bring in financing to support the private sector to be able to drive this agenda. And so as much as possible also, you realize that the way we build the program is to build it off the government balance sheet. So financing for this program is not going to be the kind of financing that you put on the government balance sheet. And this is important because today we are in an IMF program. And even after we go off, there will be obligations that we need to meet. Those obligations constrain the ability of government to be able to mobilize all the finances that we need to drive the agenda. And so we need to find ways of bringing in $1 million a year. We can't develop with that. So what we are looking at is how do you get the private sector to bring in the funding to be able to also help us drive this forward. And just to give you a sense of the value chain. Poultry, and then fish. Yes, those are the ones. We decided on this. Was demand in Ghana, and the fourth one was is those no actually it was impact on other value chains. Yeah. Yes, impact on other value chains. So the fourth one was its impact on other value chains. So for instance, if you take maize, it impacts so many other value chains, right? So stuff like that. So those are the four criteria we use. In the manufacturing space, we are focusing on pharmaceuticals. We are focusing on machinery and fabrication. Now, machinery and fabrication is important because if you look at our agriculture and even some of the manufacturing we do, almost every equipment there we import. But there's very simple tools that we should be able to manufacture in this country. So the idea of the machinery and fabrication bit is to ensure that we are building the capacity to manufacture the very simple tools that we require in our farms, the very simple tools that we require in some of our factories to be able to produce. And then we have textiles, garments and textiles, and then, of course, agro-processing. Those are the value chains that we are looking at. So now let's talk about why the 24-hour economy. Why do we even need this 24-hour economy? The simple answer is that because today's economy that we have is structured in a way that does not generate the jobs and prosperity for Ghanaians. That's the simple lesson. We have an economy that is structured for extraction and not for transformation. It's structured in a way that it does not necessarily benefit the Ghanaian. So this basically is a nostalgic slide. It shows you what we've done before, what we are capable of doing before. We produced the Akasonoma radio. We produce corned beefs. And, people get shocked that Ghana, we used to produce corned beef. But corned beef is so simple to produce, right? But we don't have it today. Today, all we know is, corned beef from Brazil and other places. Okay. So you have an economy today which is structured in a way that we are largely dependent on the export of a few, raw materials. Actually, 3 raw materials: gold, cocoa, and oil. And almost everything else we import. Okay, it is no different from the economy of the 1920s. Only difference is we've replaced timber with oil. So we are essentially just an economy for extraction. And then we import everything else. Oh, so if you take a look at this graph, for instance. So this graph, we're trying to look at contribution to growth, right? So what's the contribution to GDP growth in Ghana? And if you actually even look at composition of GDP, it's not very different from this contribution graph. But what you see is trade and repairs today completely dominates our economy. Okay. We've moved to a situation where agriculture's contribution has come down. Manufacturing contribution has also come down, but mostly it's trade and repairs. That's driving growth in this economy. And most people will tell you that, well, agriculture's contribution coming down is not necessarily bad. Because if you look at most industrialized economy, as the economies grow, agri's contribution will come down. But then what you have is that you have industrialization going up before you get to the stage where services come up. So some people say, oh, but if services is going up in Ghana, then we are industrialized. No, it is what economists call premature deindustrialization. So we move from an agrarian economy to a service-driven economy without industrializing. So basically what we then have is everything else that we use in this, we don't have the technology. We're importing all the technology. And if you look into this trade and repairs, almost all the components are actually imported commodities. So our economy is driven by, trade in imported commodities, imported technology, everything else. And, we export raw materials that people then use to produce the things that they bring to us. And sometimes once they do that, they also give us a bit of aid from all the value that they've extracted from us, and we are happy. We need to change that. Now, in looking at the things that we actually import, we wanted to take a look at what the composition of export, what are the things that we're exporting? Because, mind you, we're looking at a self-reliant economy. So you need to know what is it that your people rely on so that you can figure out how you produce it for them. And number 2 and 3 were the interesting ones here, which for me was a bit shocking when I didn't know this until I started looking at it. Well, number 2 largest food imports is guts, bladders, and stomachs of animals. And number 3 is frozen cuts and offal of fowl. This number 2, I was shocked when I saw it. Because this is, you go to a chop bar, you get your TZs and your towel and all of that. And you expect that this towel is some sheep that was slaughtered in, say, Ashama or somewhere. Not knowing it is coming from Europe, right? The yemuade we are eating, the gizzard and all of this, is coming from somewhere in Europe. Luckily, we didn't have any gizzards today, but we had, chicken cuts over here. Right? We can't have an economy where even the simple things that we can produce here, we refuse to and we import. Okay. What you have is a number of things. First of all, if you have an economy that is structured that way, even when you are trying to solve problems in one sector, you end up causing problems in other sectors. And I'll give you an example. You give $100 million to somebody to start a tomato manufacturing plant. But what the person will most likely do is they will use some of the money to buy the land. That's almost all the money that will remain in this country. The rest of the money, they will buy machinery. They will go and import it from somewhere. They will buy the raw materials. The tomato, we don't produce the tomatoes. They will import the tomatoes. They will import the human resource that you need because they'll tell you they need a certain kind of engineer that you can't find in Ghana. So you might end up having about 90 million out of that, your 100 million, that you give to somebody to start the factory being used to buy things from outside. Not only that, every year they would also need to then demand, more things from outside in order to keep the business running. So by giving 100 million to someone to set up a factory, what you might have then done is impose a $90 million charge on your your balance of payments account, which then goes to impact your currency. It impacts your inflation, and then the important inflation and all of those things that we have. But there's also something critical that we are not even seeing. Here we are looking at, this graph looks at GDP growth over time from 1992 to 2023. And it's looking at GDP in current US dollar terms. So this is not growth rate, this is actual GDP. And you realize it's grown over the years, right? Our GDP has grown over the years. Now this looks at our employment rate over the years. And what you see is whilst GDP is growing, our employment rate is falling down. So the economy is not creating enough jobs with growth. We have, because of the way we've structured our economy, we've hampered the ability of the economy to create jobs with the growth that it experiences. We did an analysis in 2023 looking at what we call employment elasticity of output. In the 90s, this was around 0.7. By 2023, when you look at 2023 data, it was about 0.2. What does that mean? That means in the 90s, a 10% GDP growth was improving employment rates by about 7%. Today, it's improving it by just about 2%. You can't build an economy where all your growth translates into job creation for people somewhere else and not for your own people. Okay. So this is why we need a 24-hour economy. We need to change this structure of the economy so that you now have an economy that is, industrialized, is self-reliant, resilient to economic shocks, and whose benefits are actually experienced by its people. Where if the economy is growing, you see Ghanaians actually prospering. Not an economy where it's growing, but Ghanaians are like, we can't see it in our pockets. Okay. That is why we need a 24-hour economy, and that's why we put in place a 24-hour economy. Now, if you take the 8 sub-programs, the way the 8 sub-programs have been structured is to identify the specific constraints within those sectors and figure out ways to overcome those constraints. So one of the things that we are doing, even to start off all of this, is we're proposing certain incentives that ensure that we are directing investments into the value chains that we want to focus on, and also ensuring that it's easier for people to succeed over there. Part of what we are doing with those proposals, incentives proposal, is to remove discretion. Because if you take a look at the exemptions law in Ghana today, there's so much discretion, which means you apply and somebody has to decide if you get it or not. One of the things we want to do is to ensure that if there's clarity on what you need to do to enjoy these exemptions. You don't need to go and apply to anybody. You just need to know if I do A, B, C, D, it accrues to me. Remove that discretion and make it very clear for people to know what to do. But in order to also execute the sub-programs, we need to then develop specific projects that tackle the constraints and ensure that we overcome those constraints. And some of the projects that we've talked about, that we've developed, is what I'm going to talk about. First one is the Volta Economic Corridor. And perhaps some of you have heard about it because the president spoke about it at length. Because as you look at Ghana's, development, the distribution of development in Ghana and all of that, one of the things that strikes you is that when it comes to infrastructure, the roads, the railways, and all of that, a lot of it, you find a lot more of it, is not a lot though, right? So the little that we have, you find a lot more of it scattered in the western side and not much on the eastern side. Now, there's a reason for that, because people don't avert their minds to that. The reason for that is that the colonial masters who built a lot of this infrastructure, when they came, they were interested in extraction. So they built the railways to the mines where they could extract the things. They built the railways and the roads to the places where they could get the cocoa and move the cocoa to the ports and get out. The unfortunate thing for us is, after independence, we haven't sat back to rethink our development paradigm and shift the way we look at development. So you have a situation where you have this lake, the Volta Lake, the biggest man-made lake by surface area in the world. So much land around it, but so the dots, the black dots are actually population density. You see how all of this place is almost empty, right? You don't have people around the lake. In other places, when you go to other places, the water bodies are actually the places where you have more people living. In Ghana, it's the opposite, right? Because of where it is. And there is very little irrigated land across here. When you look at the total irrigated land under cultivation in Ghana, it's about only 5% of the total land under cultivation. The public sector projects that we actually looked at was only about 33,000, Charles. The JIDA, 33,000 hectares, right? Only about 33,000 hectares. You have more than 4 million hectares of land under cultivation. Only about, 33,000 of them is under irrigation by public projects. And if you consider all the privates, there's less than 5% of them under irrigation. And yet we have all of this water. We spoke to an engineer from the Volta VRA about the effects of irrigation on the water levels in the dam, in the lake. And what we're told is the amount of water that the lake, the power generation, they use for power generation is so much that even if we irrigated every part of the Volta Lake, it's not going to affect power generation, right? Because the irrigation won't reduce the quantum of water in it by any bit. I think when we checked, there was about 140 billion cubic meters of water in the Volta Lake that we're told is there. So you have the situation.
Nas, it's 32 trillion gallons.
32 trillion gallons. Okay. So much water, so much potential, arable land, and we are not using it. Now, guess why we are not utilizing it? Because what they will tell you is that it's too expensive to develop the place. There are no roads there, so if you want to access it, you need to build the roads. And we don't have the money to build the roads. That's what we are told. And essentially, that also means our colonial master didn't build a road there for us, and so we won't be able to develop. So we are saying, okay, if it's so expensive to build the roads here, then let's use the water itself as the transportation. Because water, you can use water for transportation. And water transportation, we learn, is actually 1/8 the cost of road transport. So it's cheaper, it can be greener, and it is less expensive for us to develop. Okay. So if we use the water for transportation, then we open the place up, and then we can create, irrigated agriculture all around there and ensure that we are significantly increasing agric output. And then you can then co-locate with industry, agro-processing, and all of that. And then you have an economic corridor that can feed all of us here and even our neighbors. And closely linked to that, so basically what this project would do is, one, connect the Akosombo, the Mpakadan Railway to the lake, so then you are connecting to Tema. So you have a way from Tema all the way to the lake, and then to be able to transport things along the lake. When you're able to do that, what that means is that the people from Mali and Burkina Faso and Co that are coming down, they don't need to come all the way to Accra. They can stop up here and pick up their stuff and go. You reduce accidents and all the congestion that you have on the roads on this part of Ghana. Then we're also looking at converting the airport in Tamale into an air cargo hub. So it's the closest, airport to Europe and North Africa and north of us. It's an international airport. We are not necessarily using it for much. But when you build so much agriculture over here, what you also need is you need a place where you can transport things very quickly. And we want to then, as part of this corridor, create the air cargo hub at the Tamale Airport to transport things. So that's the Volta Economic Corridor concept. That in itself is massively transformational if we can get it done. And we've had some interesting expression of interests. I'm sure within this week, there will be some of it that would be eventually announced. It's not in my place to announce it, but it will be announced, and you will start to see some of the work that's gone on over there. So there's a logistics thing. There's this project to mainstream digital skills within the TVET systems. Why is it? Why are we thinking about it this way? Number one, digital skills are vocational skills today, right? And you want to get to a stage where everybody has access to the digital skills. And you have TVET colleges spread all over the country, right, who, if you take a look at their curriculum, they are not necessarily producing the right kind of people with the right kind of skills for the market. So what we are doing is we've worked with them on a project where we would develop a curriculum for digital excellence, and then they will start rolling this out within the TVET system. What it would then do is that it means if it's available in the TVET system, then it's available to almost all Ghanaians, because you find the TVET, schools all over Ghana. And then you build, together with that, you build the digital centers of excellence that provide the tools for both the students and also for the communities. So you end up solving the problem of the training people with digital skills, but also providing digital tools for the communities to be able to access. So that's also one of the projects that we are looking at. Let's see. Are there any more things that actually, so the first 6 that we are looking at are these 6 TVETs to pilot it, and then we'll move it forward right after that. There are several other projects. So you see, I'm sure this has been sent to you. You see several other projects that we are looking at. The thing is, we are not going to be able to execute all of this at once. We need to phase this. But one of the things that we also realize in developing this project is when you talk to our development partners, the development finance institutions and all of that, what they tell you is that Ghana often doesn't have projects that are viable. So in the year, when the year begins, it's now that we are thinking about projects to fund. And then we spend the rest of the year doing project preparation, and by the end of the year, we've forgotten about it and we've jumped onto new projects. We want to change that and build a long-term pipeline of projects which are all focused on the objective that we want to achieve so that we can build towards it. That's what we're looking at, and that's why we've developed all of this project list. Now, let me talk about the value chain financing bit. To start off with, this is very music to our ears. The Bank of Ghana wants to work to lower rates to 10% in this country. And we think that's important. Because when you look at financing, right, there were 3 issues that we identified as big constraints to financing. One was the interest rates. The kind of interest rates we have in this country doesn't allow you to build a business. It can allow you to trade, but it doesn't allow you to build a long-term business. That's number one. Then you have a situation where the tenor of facilities hardly go beyond 24 months. You might get 36 in a few instances. But most credit in Ghana, most financing in Ghana is short-term. You don't have a lot of money coming through the venture capital, system. The banks will give you, 12 months, 24 months at the most. And what is also, what's also more interesting is that even to get access to this high interest, short-term lending, you need to put up huge collaterals. Right? Part of the problem with the collateral thing is also regulatory, because the regulator requires them to do that. But then you have a situation where financing is highly collateralized, short-term, and very expensive. it makes it almost impossible for the Ghanaian to be able to compete. Because sometimes you are competing with industrialists who are bringing money from their countries at significantly lower interest rates, sometimes even subsidized. And then you are competing with them over here. Right? You have a situation today when you go to BA and others to buy cashew, you have, I think it's the Indians and the Chinese who are able to buy the cashew and the cassava and co because the Ghanaians can't raise the kind of funding to buy it. Why? Because if you are going to get a loan in Ghana, by the time you finish your business, you won't be able to pay off. So our whole structure, financing structure here is meant to address these problems. And so we've thought of financing in two ways. First is financing the infrastructure, the bulk infrastructure. And second is financing the enterprises. Financing the bulk infrastructure is important because you want a situation where when businesses come in, it is just plug and play. And that's why we are looking at building agroecological parks. And in the agroecological park, essentially what you need is you need to get the land, prepare the land, put in place the irrigation facilities, put in place the storage facilities and all of that so that farmers can easily get on there and start farming. You want industrial parks where the land is prepared, you have the energy, you have the water, and all the things that an industrialist needs, so that when the industrialist comes in, it is easy for them to just plug in and play, right? So, but somebody needs to finance this bulk infrastructure so that it doesn't become the headache of the industrialist or the farmer and all of that. And over there, we are working with the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. They are the infrastructure partner for the 24-hour economy program. What they will do is they are looking to set up 3 SPVs. One focus on industrial parks, one focus on agroecological parks, and one focus on lake transport. And these SPVs will then crowd in private investment to be able to execute these projects. The government support for this is to provide what we call viability gap funding, because some of the infrastructure might not be commercially viable. But with the government funding, you're able to then plug that gap, make it commercially viable, and then crowd in the funding to be able to move it forward. So once they set up the industrial parks, the agroecological parks, you then have private enterprises who will then invest in there. But you need to also think about how you finance these private sector guys. And that's where we are working with Exim Bank, DBG, and the Venture Capital Trust Fund to provide the funding for these guys. And the model here, there are two things that we are currently pursuing. The first one is on CapEx financing, because these guys also have capital expenditure that they need to finance. When you think of financing generally for the business, there's CapEx, there's OpEx. So we need to figure out how are they financing CapEx, how are they financing the OpEx. The CapEx financing, because of the situation we are in as a country, and it's very difficult to borrow and for government to be able to borrow and all of that, we're looking at working with some consultants to build a scheme where export credit agencies finance their businesses or businesses in their country that produce the kind of capital equipment we need, and then be able to then export those equipment to us over here under a scheme that is anchored around Exim Bank. So Exim Bank will basically anchor all of this, provide the capital expenditure, capital equipment, and be able to provide it to the enterprises. And then we have the value chain financing bit, which is what is shown over here, where we are sourcing in money that will run through DBG and Exim Bank and others through the banking system to potential beneficiaries. The key over here, this is maybe later we'll be able to talk a bit more about it, but the key here is there is a technical assistance component of all of this to organize potential beneficiaries into cooperatives and trade associations and de-risk them such that it's easier for the banks to then deal with them. We are building an online lending platform that helps credit decisions to be taken very quickly. And then there's also credit enhancements that is built in here to ensure that the banks have some comfort and also the lenders are protected to a certain extent. So that's in general, no, go further. That's in general what we are looking at. I think this is the on-lending platform that I was talking about. Now, the other thing that you realize, people often ask, so how can I take part in this? How can I also enjoy the 24-hour economy? There are several opportunities. I just highlighted some of them here, and we can highlight more. So we have a program, a project that we call 24/7 Ready Business. So these are businesses whose model today allows them to be able to do 24/7 immediately. And those we are going to certify and also provide them incentives to be able to go ahead straight. So that once we launch on our website, we'll be inviting people to sign up to be in that program. If you are a farmer, you can become an anchor farmer in an agroecological park. What does that mean? These are the parks that we are building with irrigation facilities around the Volta Economic Corridor. You can sign up to be the anchor farmer. An anchor farmer, what does that mean? It means you have the ability to farm, what's the minimum distance? 5 hectares? 10? Okay. So 10 to about 30 hectares of land, and then be able to then also bring in a few people in there. So you can become an anchor farmer if you have that capacity. So if you're a farmer and you want to be part of this, or you want to get into farming, you can come in and become an anchor farmer. You can register your interest to become to set up an agro-processing facility. You want to process rice, you want to process tomatoes, you want to, whatever you want to process. You can actually express your interest to become one. If you want to get into transportation on the Volta Lake, you can actually express your interest. You can become a transporter. You can register your interest in the textiles parks that we have. There's a pharmaceutical park that we are proposing also. You can register your interest in. So there are several of these projects, and the whole idea is to create the opportunity for private sector people to be able to come in and take advantage. I will end it here and hand it over to MFA to take us forward. Thank you very much.
I think he deserves a round of applause, doesn't he? Thank you so much. I know headlines have been written. We are only waiting to put in a figure. Maybe I'll start it off in terms of the questions for today. You talked about private investment funding. How exactly will that work? And how much exactly are we looking at for it to cost, if we've put any figures to it?
Let me take that. The total estimated investment required over the next few years is about $4 billion times 10, so 400 billion Ghana cedis. And we hope it stays that way. And most of this is going to come from the private sector. One of the problems that investors have had in working in Ghana, and I'm sure all of you have heard that because of the unpredictable and incoherent incentive regimes and also the high costs of operating in Ghana, including the under-table payments and requests and the corruption, although some companies have left and gone to Ivory Coast, where it's easier to do business. Our aim is to reverse that. And so one of the key components is, one, a coherent, practical, transparent incentive regime that is based on performance. And as NASA said, with very little discretion. So we remove the corruption component out. 2, build these agroecological parks so that you meet the requirements of both domestic private investors and foreign investors with land where there's no title disputes. One of the big companies told us that they want to expand their business. When they started the construction, one family came, said they own the land. Another family came, they said they own the land. Finally, the military came and said they own the land. So they cannot move. one of the big pineapple growers and fresh fruits, as well as orange juice and pineapple juice mix producers and exporters, and dry fruit exporters, proposed an expansion of its raw material base by growing more pineapples and whatever, only to discover that the land that they had paid for several years ago, which they had earmarked for this expansion and growth program, was being used by sandwinners, supported by the police as land guards. You cannot build industry or agriculture with this confusion around land and without enforcement of the relevant provisions of the law that protects investors. So that's number 2. 3, you cannot build an economy, build a private sector with 36% interest rate. It's not going to happen. You may deceive yourself, but it won't happen. And nor can you build an investor-friendly private sector response if the tenor of your loans is 12 months or 24 months. You're looking for patient growth capital that allows for expansion, and that allows for capacity utilization, and that allows for local content raw materials. And then you cannot create an environment where you increase output through crop yields, better on-farm maintenance, if the rain period, particularly in the savannah and the northern section, is only a few months in the year, and sometimes because of climate change, it doesn't come at all. So you have drought. In fact, as I'm speaking now, there are droughts in certain parts of the country. So your only countervailing measure is to have water. So you provide land, water, connectivity, because without connectivity, you cannot communicate, you cannot move data at a fast pace, and energy. So if you have all these components, then the private sector feels very comfortable to invest. Of the investment that we're expecting, only about 4 or 5% will come from government by way of stimulating the private sector through the bulk infrastructure that will be provided by a GIF, most of which will be just government seed money, and then the private sector will come in. We have had so much interest in this Volta Economic Corridor for several reasons. One, AFTA represents a market of 1.4 billion people. For those of you who know economics, the age group that has the greatest propensity to spend are young people between the ages of 18 and 36, because they're now building their lives. Most of these Western economies, even Asian economies, particularly China, Japan, Korea, have a major population problem. Their population is aging, and therefore the capacity to spend is also limited. And also the workforce is not there to power the economies as they've done before. At some point, industrial manufacturing in China was growing year on year by 20%. So every 5 years, if you compound it, before 5 years, they've doubled industrial production. They can't do that anymore. And if you look at the figures in China, even though they're leaping, you can also see an emergence of disinflation, where interest rates are around 2%. Remember Japan, for almost 20 years, they've been disinflating. Why? Because of age, because of consumption patterns. Africa has two things going for it. 64% of the arable land left in the world is in Africa. The most youthful population, on average around 18 to 25 years, is in Africa. So if we can provide the jobs and the income streams, then we also become an important consumption market, not only for domestic production, but attract private investment to tap into that consumption market. So what you see, last week, Chief of Staff Julius Deborah met 150 Chinese companies. We have a set coming in probably around September, October. Koreans are coming, Vietnamese are coming, Singaporeans are coming. I believe other Africans too will come. And our own private sector, we have to mobilize. Because the opportunity is also that the world global trade environment has become unstable. And because of historical reasons and understandings reached under the WTO and so on and so forth, some of what is happening now, where countries are raising the tariff barriers to prevent other countries' goods from coming in, deliberately collapsing their rates of exchange so that they can become more competitive, is creating an environment where Africa becomes attractive. Because if you look at Ghana, its geographical location, you can produce and export to the rest of Africa. You can produce and export around the Cape Horn to, South Asia and to the Middle East. You can go to Northwest Europe and you can cross the Atlantic. And those who want to cross the Atlantic and enter the US market, Ghana's tariff is 10%. Others are 45%, 25%, 80% in some cases. And in fact, it went to 145% in the case of China until they roll back. So we have that advantage. So when people call us and say, we want to invest, can you guarantee us water, this, we say that is how the program is designed. But one thing that Nas mentioned, and I want to emphasize this, we had a call from India just a few days ago, who want to man and operate one of the agricultural ecological zones, which some will be at 200 hectares, 10 hectares, even up to 20,000 hectares. So the question they asked me is that if we produce soya bean and we process the edible soy for edible oil and also for poultry feed and for other chemicals that are required by the cosmetic industry, lecithin as an emulsifier, glycerin, glycol, how will you guarantee that you will satisfy domestic industrial requirements before you start exporting? Because you don't want somebody to come and invest, grow the soybean, build a factory, and he has no raw material because we're exporting everything. So that was one of the questions. Second question, what is the new incentive regime that will encourage us to invest? How predictable will it be? What is the state of your courts? Do they offer fair treatment in the event of disputes for your private sector in Ghana? Because if they do, then we can be happy to also participate, because we know that the court system is not necessarily friendly to business, but is fair in its dispensation. So if you aggregate all these components, and the fact that the Volta Economic Corridor, 10 kilometers here, 10 kilometers here is 8 million hectares. That's more than 20 million acres. If you net out the forest reserves, you have 4 million hectares. Our target in the next few years is to develop 2 million of those hectares in agroecological parks, double a lot of our production in maize, millet, soybean, groundnuts, rice. We import 1 million tons of rice every year. At a cost of $400 million, we need 371 million chickens that we consume every year. We produce less than 15% of that. Most of what you see as chicken parts, and I don't want to put you off, are old stock that are coming out of these processes to us in Africa to consume. I remember during the Chernobyl crisis, it was reported, I don't know whether you remember, Chernobyl was when the nuclear facility in Ukraine had a meltdown and created massive radiation all the way through to the corridor of even Eastern Europe. At that time, Poland was a big manufacturer of poultry, and Czechoslovakia. who had radiation contamination. They brought a lot of the poultry parts to Ghana, and we ate it happily. That cannot continue. So there is private sector interest. There are private sector interest in garments from Asia. I don't want to mention the names, but there are quite a lot. And we had a public-private dialogue sponsored by ILO, UNDP, and who else? TBI. And TBI, Tony Blair Institute. Investors came, indicated their desire to support. DFI said they were very happy to continue their support because you have the JET program organized by the FCDO that's going on, and you have other groups like KFW who are interested in pushing this agenda of textiles and garments because, one, textiles and garments basically generate a lot of employment. Two, there's a massive market in Africa, massive market globally for textiles of different kinds and apparel. And there's a big market in Asia itself. Because don't forget that one of the reasons why Asia has risen, and risen so dramatically, is their labor competitive advantage. As they age, as they develop, as they become more middle class, people want better pay and better salaries. Okay. So the labor cost advantage has diminished in favor of us. Because really, if you're earning, is it 10 cedis a day? Is the minimum wage 10 cedis a day? Or 20-something cedis a day, I think. That's $1, maybe less. Not for 1 hour, but for 24 hours of work or 1 day of work. So if we're able to boost our productivity, invite our domestic private sector to invest, invite international private sector to invest, achieve the levels of output that we require, then of course incomes will go up, but not as fast to make us uncompetitive with other jurisdictions and origins. And the key thing really is that if we do things correctly, then we have, and I don't say this in an exaggerated manner, because we know the approaches that have been made, but we are not able to disclose them now. Then we have a huge opportunity as a country to be an industrial agricultural hub for West Africa, eventually to Africa, and to be a trading powerhouse to Northwest Europe, South Europe, and potentially to the United States. The United States is a bit unstable now, so when we're doing our computations, we don't really include them very much. Because today, somebody will decide that no goods from Africa, and there's nothing that any of us can do. If you see the Europeans and shivering, you must know that if it happens to us, we will not only shiver, we'll just shake and disappear. So in short, this is about, our program is $4 billion. We expect government to support the seed capital for the potential authority, where the Secretariat will be, and also, but most importantly, support the viability gap funding for GIFT as a bulk infrastructure supporter, provider with the amount of money that we're asking for, around $300 million. And they will raise the rest. And there are people who have come. There's so many people who have come who want to invest in this volatile economic corridor. And they are looking for the elements and components that I've just described. And the last thing, and then I'll keep quiet. If you want to build an economy that is resilient, is efficient, is competitive, then your bureaucracy has to change its ways. Our bureaucracy cannot see the private sector or the ordinary citizen that requires services from them promptly as enemies. They are there to serve citizens and the private sector to grow this economy so that the bureaucracy itself will be better paid and will also expand and create jobs. Because as you expand your economy, the bureaucracy must catch up in terms of regulation, in terms of policy formulation, in terms of grant support, R&D support. Because one of the components that we've laced into this program is research and development. You will not believe it. The kind of things CSIR has come up with that is lying on the shelf, able to create value. We have to change our ways. We have to have a more friendly bureaucracy, less corruption, less me about myself and my pocket and my poverty, and more about looking into not only the long future, but the immediate future where we can transform so that salaries go up, jobs go up, it's inclusive, and you don't see little children chasing you with a car in a traffic light looking for you to buy chains and so on and so forth. That's the aim we want to achieve. Thank you.
That.
I'm so sorry, I apologize.
That's okay. I'm the only one who will get a detailed answer, but please keep your questions very short, and then I don't know if there are still questions after all that, but Bernard.
We haven't even asked questions, you're asking us to keep them short. The first one is a comment, and then I have like a couple of questions. I think this is really great, and I thank you for organizing it, because 24-hour economy was marketed as some 3x3 shift system, but it's actually an economic transformation thing. So if you hadn't done this, and if you hadn't preempted the launch with this, we probably would have still gone into the press, the main release, with a very limited idea of what it is. But that also creates a problem for you, because in the minds of the public, it's just a slogan they use as part of what they wanted to do in the election. But this is really serious stuff. So our work is very difficult as media to try and get people to understand what it is. So you need to be patient and to also be realistic in what you expect us to do. Because for a lot of us, the first time we are hearing this level of detail. So it's actually an economic transformation program marketed as a shift system. Right? And there's also a political issue where now both your opponents and your supporters have a certain perception of what it is, and it's not really what it is. It's actually much deeper. So if after you launch it, you're not getting the right coverage, you need to know that it may take time. I'm seeing that as a journalist. Because I'll say, even after the interview with you, was when a lot of people actually understood what the hell 24-hour economy was. A lot of people were just talking about 3x3, but didn't even know what it meant. So for a lot of my colleagues in the newsroom, they say, oh, so this is what it actually means. So it's a bigger thing than we all see. Having said that, I have 2 questions, or 2.5. You said this is off government balance sheet. And you mentioned and hinted how things like, EXIM and DBG will come in. We have a massive financing gap in Ghana. What is AFDB and AfrExim and other African financiers interested in this? Because what you are trying to do is beyond the finance in Ghana. That's question 1. Question 2, on the basis of what I've said about how people see it, are there specific targets? Because you have 3 pillars, you have 4 principles, you have 8 programs, you have many, many projects. A lot of things are going on there, right? From a communication perspective, are you able to tell us milestone by end of 2025? This is what we want to see. End of 2026, we want to see. By end of the administration's term, we need some specific things, because there are too many things happening in this 24-hour economy. So that's question 2. And question 2.5. When you explain the financing thing very well, the fact that our interest rates don't support manufacturing, but you missed out on power. Our power costs also don't support industrialization, NAS. So it's not just 36% interest rate. If you're producing power at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, you cannot industrialize with that too. I know you can't do everything, but you cannot tell me you are transforming industrialization without at least broaching the subject of cost of power. So I don't know who's going to answer, but
let me do the answer.
Okay, cool.
Here. So,
or you would want to answer 8?
I just want, there's a lot of questions, so let's deal with it. Okay. So let's deal with the power part first. The Volta Economic Corridor and other parts, because this is all over the country, there are other projects in Western North, palm oil and so on, as part of the value chain. But we know the problems of the cost of power. We know the need to recover legacy debt. We know that legacy debt is around $2 billion or something like that. That has to be priced into the electricity bill. Knowing that, and knowing where this Volta Economic Corridor is going to basically be situated, our energy mix for this program is solar power, attracting new battery technologies that allow for 24-hour provision of power, combined with bioenergy. You know, if you build large agricultural parks, you're going to have a lot of agricultural waste. So you use that agricultural waste to generate energy. particularly if you have industrial parks who will need gas and are far away from the gas pipelines to be able to fire their boilers, particularly for food and beverage processing, evaporation, and so on, crystallization and so on. So that's second. Third, the grid itself. In the area where the development will occur, outside the exclusion zone, because near the gorge, you can't go there, where the dam is basically proximate to the dam. So everything will have to be upstream and downstream of Pong. The transmission backbone there is very weak. It's about 69 kV. So we obviously have to find other means and that's why the solar, the waste to energy is important. And the model we're using is a model that's evolving. Where you, Bernard, as an investor, come and say, okay, you need 50 megawatts in your agroecological park. I will build a solar plant. It's about 1 megawatt per hectare. I will build a solar plant, 50 hectares. I'll sell you electricity. And the protocols of this program for the industrial parks and the agroecological parks, you cannot sell at more than 5 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. And it's perpetual. And it's renewable. And it's carbon friendly in terms of environmentally friendly. So on top of that, you then build also your capacity to generate the requisite carbon credits for offsets, both in the voluntary market and also in the state-to-state market under the Paris Convention. So we've designed this in a way that it can be financeable. It provides the energy mix that will attract industry. And eventually, once we get out of our problems with the grid, both in terms of reinforcing the backbone around that area, I'm told that they want to do a loop from Tamale and then basically bring it around to across the Volta so it's more resilient. Once you're able to achieve that, then the mix may change. It may be grid, solar, and then bio. But that mix has to be there, as many other countries are beginning to adopt. I'm sure you know that California is totally stressed now by electricity outages and so on, because there's so much pressure, particularly during the summer when everybody has their air conditioning on. So it's not peculiar to Ghana. There are outages even in New York sometimes. So we have to get the energy mix right, and within the incentive environment that allows people to invest in captive power, in microgrids that support industry and agricultural production. So that's number one. Okay. Number two, specific projects, targets. We're now doing the concept notes for the implementation because we've been approached by several international bodies. I don't want to name all of them, but I'll just name a couple. Okay. AFDB, Exim, who want to be part of this program and who want to see Ghana begin to provide the pipeline of projects that allows them to use their ADF to finance. One of the problems they have, and NASA has made it very clear, Ghana's pipeline of projects is incoherent. It's not tied to any particular transformation agenda. It's project by project by project in silos. And more importantly, the project pipeline is not enough and it dries up very quickly. And then new ones are conceived and they are abandoned. I'll give you an example. Mechanization support, which is part of the agroecological zones, which will be private sector owned in our program. The public mechanization centers, some of them are in the bush, growing wheat. So we looked at all this, and as Asna said, fantastic projects going on in Ghana, financed by this MasterCard, Norfund, this, but they don't hang together. And the idea is to concentrate our efforts in the kind of ways that we prevent the fragmentation, and also we concentrate the output. So we do have targets. And the concept notes we're developing is designed and based on these targets, because no bank will finance you if you don't have a clear target of what your output is going to be, what your input is going to be. So we're expecting, for instance, in the agroecological parks, in the value chains, soya bean, groundnuts, rice, and so on, to achieve targets over the 5-year period, which at the very least will let us cut imports by 50%. But the specifics are being worked out because that's scientific things. You don't just get up and because one of the reasons why several programs have failed, and I'm not in any way downgrading possibly the good intentions around the 1D, 1F. You don't design programs because you want to produce. You design programs because the market wants it. So you work back from the market, both in terms of output, in terms of demand, in terms of market saturation, in terms of opening new markets, but most importantly, in terms of your price competitiveness and the reliability of your supply chains. A lot of people export shea nut and so on, shea butter, young, small people, craft, cocoa, chocolates. They send it to America, they send it to Europe. You know the biggest problem they have? It's not consistent. The demand is there, people want it, but there's no consistency because we have so many problems. We want to remove that consistency and inconsistency and bring reliability and predictability to Ghanaian exports through the program that we're doing. So we do have quantitative targets and we have qualitative targets. One thing Nas didn't talk about, and it's very essential to the program, is standardization and the role of Ghana Standards Authority, FDA, to get our goods acceptable in foreign markets. Don't forget that the Europeans, as well as the Americans, the Americans more blatantly in terms of raising tariff barriers, but the Europeans have non-tariff barriers, NTBs. And if you've looked at the recent, I urge you to look at them, all of you, the recent EU sustainability rules. We have to school our people to achieve those standards so we can enter those markets. Because one day, if you are not schooled and implement those standards, you're out. So standardization, levels of quality, ISO certifications, and so on are going to be very key. So inevitably, this program cannot succeed without boosting Ghana Standards Board's capacity, not just as an entity in Accra, but all over the country. Labs that test food for microbiological content, E. coli, salmonella, are all over available in the country. Now, SGS with Tema and Takoradi and Kumasi, that's it. Even Takoradi, they do mostly oil testing. Kumasi, I think they do testing for cocoa. But food, no. So I'll stop here and let Nas take over with the other. And H2 is here to assist. So Nas, please take over.
Arnold would want to add something small in terms of the financing. Arnold, that's him. Yes.
Thank you very much. So Bernard had raised the issue around the financial institutions and then the capacity for finance, both locally and internationally. And we've heard that there are a lot of international financing partners that are ready to finance the activities under the program. But most importantly, the key theme for financing the 24-hour program is also to look at it from a value chain angle. And this is why this program is different from a lot of the programs that have come before. The value chain, an integrated value chain. And so, for instance, when you look at back to the poultry industry, and you are thinking of the birds that are going to be sold at Christmas, it starts with maize that they've been fed with. And so the poultry farmer needs financing to buy maize. And essentially, that can have a figure. But that can also have a type of credit. So it's maize he needs, not really money to buy maize. If you can tell the maize farmer, for instance, to provide the maize to the poultry farmer on credit, a supplier's credit, that has a value. You've been able to move maize to the farmer. Now, the maize farmer also needs inputs. He needs seeds, he needs land, he needs water, and that also has a value. And so you'd realize that you could be looking at, if you look at them separately, sector by sector, and layer of the chain by layer, typically this cumulated amount becomes a lot because the maize farmer needs maybe about 1 million cedis, the poultry farmer needs about 1 million cedis, and then the input suppliers also need about 1 million. And I'm just looking at, let's say, a specific volume of production. Now, that can look like 3 million. But you see, with 1 million cedi of financing, you can unlock what is like 3 million or 10 million cedis worth of credit that is required, because you are looking at the chain. And so by the time you are financing the poultry farmer, that same level of finance goes up the chain to the maize farmer. That same level of finance goes up the chain to the input farmer. And so that is the very different approach that the program undertakes, such that with just a little amount of financing, once you look at the value chain around all the sectors of a particular product, you are then able to finance multiple layers. And in that way, we now end up doing far much more than has been done previously. So that is also the unique approach for financing that the program is going to look at when it comes to enterprises across the various priority sectors.
I think we can take some more questions, if there are still questions. Okay, the gentleman there, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim, GH1 TV. Look, two quick things I want to find out. So before we got where we are today, this was a campaign promise. We were told about shifts, employment creation. If you peg that against what was in existence, which you have just mentioned, one district, one factory, many believe that the agenda was almost the same, create employment, get industries in places where they don't exist. Now, as part of the targets you are looking at, are you looking at the low-hanging fruit? I mean, companies existing, ready to ramp up production with your support and provide immediate employment before you look at the big-ticket projects as you're talking about. That's one. Two, what's the level of collaboration you are going to have with the National Development Planning Commission? Because sitting here and hearing you speak, I see many of the things here are groundbreaking initiatives that you want to take. That could be tied into even the 40-year development plan that your government initially wanted to roll out. Is there a collaboration between your outfit and the National Development Planning Commission?
Yes, NASA is a member of the National Development Planning Commission. NASA, as part of our collaboration with the National Development Planning Commission. And you're right, in building this document, apart from the many authors from the private sector, we also looked at some important documents historically. We looked at the 7-year development plan, Nkrumah's plan, which basically had some of the vision of the Volta Economic Corridor that we are going to implement now. We also looked at the NDPC 40-year development plan, and the Savannah, the one written by Charles Abrugi on the transformation of the northern section of Ghana, the Savannah zone, into a productive force. So we revisited that, and that's why we have the Tamale Vegetable Hub at the Tamale Airport Vegetable Hub. So we didn't just get up and conceive. In fact, a lot of what we're saying is not really new. It's there, and what we've tried to do is to aggregate it and add some creativity. But the most important thing, and I think Arnold has just mentioned it, is a value chain approach, the integrated approach. And that's really how we approach it. So yes, we're collaborating with the Ministry of, all the ministries, and also definitely with NDPC. Because NDPC is a planning component. And so whatever we do must fit into that planning component and that outlook. I've been told that I talk too much. So Nas, can you kindly, or Ish, if you want to.
Yeah. I think you've adequately answered the question. We're working closely with the NDPC. Like he said, I'm a commissioner at the NDPC. We're making sure that we integrate all of this. And I mean, the chairman of the NDPC, Nimoy, was actually part of the manifesto committee that worked on the 24-hour economy. He made a lot of inputs into the program. So there's a lot of coordination that's going on over there. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits. And maybe, Charles, do you want to even talk about some of the... So when you talk about low-hanging fruits, it's across, across industries and across value chains. There are those in the manufacturing sector that you are referring to, and that's part of the reason why we are looking at the incentives regime and all of that. Because, you see, part of the problem that, if you look at 1D1F we had, is that there was no logic to why somebody gets a certain incentive and why another person doesn't get it. So it was basically pure, it's like, cha-cha, you get it, you don't get it, or whatever. You know, we want to remove that by ensuring that we streamline that regime. So it is clear why somebody is getting it, and there's logic to it. And then there's also a lot of other low-hanging fruits at that agri sector. I don't know if we want to talk about it yet. Do you want to talk about it? Okay, good.
Okay, thank you, Nas. We have anchor farmers already existing, and definitely they already have their lands and their farming. And what we want to do is to support them to increase productivity and also expand on their farms. So what we have on offer, we'll be supporting them. And this will be done from now till the end of the year as we work on developing the Eden, Eden Volta corridor. Also, we have processors who have the same situation. And as Nas explained, the farmers have to first of all supply the raw material before you can start doing the double or triple shift. So we're working to increase productivity and production so that the excess can go into manufacturing. And then in addition to all this, we have our own list of projects we are calling low-hanging fruits. For example, we have a Shikpon intervention, which has to do with the urban and peri-urban vegetable farming. And the idea is that people are already doing this. And so why don't we support them to have solar-powered pumps, for example, and boreholes? And with this, they could be able to give us very healthy vegetables that can supply the cities, not only Accra, but all the cities. So, Honorable Guzi mentioned something about standards. As you all can bear with me, after we had our metric system change to the metric system in 1974, since then, there've been very little enforcement of what it entails. For example, we still sell in volumes. We are not using weights to sell agricultural commodities. And that is another low-hanging fruit that we want to work on. The last but not the least has to do with the way we convey fruits and vegetables from the hinterland. And by the time you get to Accra, if you take yam, for example, as a commodity, we have 70% post-harvest loss in yam, mainly because of the way we handled it after harvesting. And it ends up having a lot of bruises and gets infected. And by the time it gets to the market, most of them, you buy and get home, you can't use it. So we want to support farmers to be able to convey these products in crates, either, wooden crates or plastic crates that are standardized. And this then can also help them to preserve and manage the post-harvest arrangements properly. Okay. I think let me end here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Dodi will add a bit
yes,
to it.
A couple of you asked questions that also relates to partnerships. I think Bernard and one of you. And at the same time also there were questions that relates to how we mobilize to get here. So as Guzi said, this is really a national mobilization, and it really relates to all the factors of productions and people who have worked with that. We've spoken to organized labor, those who produce, those who process, those who aggregate, and those who create the market themselves. To the extent that we've had a very wonderful conversation with trade union and the marketers who actually brings the goods from hinterlands to the market, and we are able to work with them to create their supply chain all the way to the market. Now, in terms of how we have organized with partners, we have mobilized several partners in various categories. We have the bilaterals who have expressed explicit commitment to this initiative and are going to work with us. We have the multilaterals. We also have the international financial institutions, private sector, diaspora communities. We have also been engaging foundations that, some research and academia. So the whole range of organization in terms of partnership that can help to really lift such a program is very key, and we have been able to manage with them. The other point is, beyond just the traditional financing that we talked about, we have also looked at innovative financing. As you know, majority of our production is going to be very consistent with environmental and social governance components. It is going to be smart in terms of agriculture that we're going to produce. It's also going to be very precise using digital technology and so on. And all these will lend themselves to impact initiatives where impact investors will be looking at, beyond just looking at how they make money. They're also looking at how you actually impact the environment. And so impact investors have expressed a lot of interest. There are interests that have been expressed by diaspora, wealthy Black Americans and others who really have the financial wherewithal, and they are looking at where they can actually invest their money. So they have a wide range of different instruments that we are looking at, SDG bonds, diaspora bonds, and so on. And then we're also looking at the share value of wealth that is embedded in the climate ecosystem, so climate financing as well. So as you can see, we have evaluated the entire ecosystem of this initiative in terms of the producers, in terms of the processors, in terms of those who want to finance this economic venture, and in terms of those who are our development partners that want to work with us and partner with us, and in terms of those who actually bring the brain power, and even those who work with us on market accessibility. The last point I'll make is that because of the interest and opportunity for Ghana to actually leverage the African Continental Free Trade Agreement area, we have structured our production in such a way that it meets the requirements of this AFTA, so that we can access 425 million West African and about 1.3 billion African states. So this is really a very powerful mobilizing opportunity. And I want to reiterate again what Guzu said. You cannot really make an impact with this kind of program without nationally mobilizing and looking and working together. There's only one side to what we have, is Ghana and Ghanaians and the citizens of the nation, that we are the ones that really can work with it. So this is really the message, that if we really mobilize in a very powerful way, this will be a moment of change in history, and all of us will be participants of this historical shift. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dodo. We'll come to Charles briefly, but let me take some more questions. We have to wrap up at this point. Joy News, I thought I've asked your question already. Okay, well, let's go to the gentleman there, and then we'll come to Joy News.
Yeah. My name is Atamensa from Ghana News Agency. Yeah, I think this is a very laudable program and very comprehensive. And last week, when the delegation from the presidency met the Speaker of Parliament, he suggested that after the unveiling of the document should be presented at the floor of Parliament for comprehensive debate by parliamentarians, by both sides, to have their buy-in, so that we have seamless implementation of the program. Will you agree to this suggestion to present it before Parliament for debate? That's my first question. Then, when you talked about water development corridor, my mind was just going why, but that you have something like the free zone where you have companies set up in particular places. So I want to find out, maybe geologically you have a place maybe in the eastern region that you have designated for the water development corridor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll just box one more in, then we can answer.
My name is Kenneth. I work with Joy News. I have just about two questions. The first one is, have we drawn any lessons from the countries that have successfully implemented the 24-hour economy? I know that we are very late to the party when it comes to this 24-hour economy. There are so many especially developed countries who have implemented this? Have we drawn any lessons from them? Because when Mr. Gusitano was making his point, he did indicate that when you are bringing out a policy, you have to know that, is this a policy that the people want? We've seen it before, where we've implemented something like the National Health Insurance Scheme, drawing inspiration from the highly successful NHS in the UK. But as we speak today, there are two opposite, health insurance schemes. So have we drawn any inspiration, or have we learned any lessons from the countries that have successfully implemented this 24-hour economic policy? And the second one is the rollout going to be nationwide? Is it going to be in the Greater Accra region? Is it going to be across the country? How is it going to be like? And then I might have missed this, but how much are we investing in it? So these are my questions.
Okay, NASA will take all the questions and I'll round up. Thank you.
All right, I have this. Okay, so let me take the first one around, have we learned any lessons from other countries? And you did mention that we are late to the party. We are not late to the party. And I say this because if you take a look at all the, and I'm sure when you talk about when you make a reference to countries that have implemented the 24-hour economy, you are talking about companies that have countries that have done the 9th shift. And a lot of it is actually cities, not countries. So I'm sure the examples that you have, when you take a look at them, it'll all be cities, right? And it makes sense for cities to do the 9th economy thing. When we refer to the 24-hour economy, like you saw during the presentation, this is an economic transformation agenda that would lead us to that place where we have a completely optimal economy that is generating the levels of job creations and prosperity for its people that we require. So in that sense, we are not late to the party. We are embarking on an economic transformation program to change, the way things are done over here. And there are several examples around the world to look to. So in building our program, we've taken a look at what the Asian tigers have done. We've taken a look at China. We've taken a look at what places like Denmark, they've done to the economy. So there's been a lot of looking at what have different countries done to transform the economy, and then also situate it in the context within which we find ourselves. And that's why, like Mr. Tano mentioned, we took a look at different programs that the country has. So the 40-year development plan, we looked at it. We looked at the 7-year development plan from Kwame Nkrumah. We've taken a look at the SADA plan, that was developed for SADA and all of that. So have we taken lessons from other places? Yes. Are we late to the party? Not at all. This is our own 24-hour economy that we are going to execute for our people.
He's asking if you're doing a nationwide rollout or it will be...
Yes, and also, like I said, this is an inclusive program which is meant to cover the whole of this country. So you're building an economy that works not only for people in Accra, but that works for people all over the world, all over the country. When we talk about the Volta Economic Corridor, the Volta Economic Corridor is not in Accra. The Volta Economic Corridor is all the different districts along the Volta all the way to the top. There are several things. I mean, we look at, when we think about machinery park, our machinery park, we're looking at Kumasi for it. We're looking at garments parks in 7 locations scattered all over the country. So there's so much that's going on everywhere. And when you talk about the value chains that we are focusing on, a lot of the agric doesn't actually happen in Ghana. It happens in other parts of this country. Right? So it's actually not an Accra-focused program. It is a program that focuses on the whole of the country as a whole. And yes, you have a lot of businesses in Accra that might get to the destination quicker just by virtue of the fact that they are in Accra. But it's not just an Accra-focused program.
Okay, so there was a question from GNA about whether we are ready to debate the whole policy on the floor of Parliament, and then also whether we're going to take a form of a free zones, is what GNA is asking.
Okay, so let me answer that. There's been approval to convert the current 24-hour Secretariat into an authority. Of course, to get it passed by parliamentary majority, you need to debate the content of the program to justify the creation of authority. So it's inevitable that that is going to happen. The second thing is that can I get the GNA question again?
So it was on whether you're ready to debate it on the floor of Parliament.
Well, I think I've answered that.
And then also the free zones, whether we're going to have an enclave.
Well, one of the problems, and I think Nas mentioned it, is the unpredictability and lack of coherence in the incentive regime, which most investors look at, not only foreign investors, but domestic investors. So what you want to do is to create a coherent regime that is based on performance and not on location. So in our discussions with the Ministry of Finance to adopt an incentive regime that is acceptable to the investor community as well as to the government and the IMF, because we're in an IMF program, an impact analysis is being done to see whether we can then implement what we proposed in a way that establishes stringent discipline, predictability, and coherence in our incentive regime. So that if you are an investor, you know that if I do A, B, C, D, E, F, this is what I get. I get a rebate in income tax. If I do A, B, C, D, F, I go 3 shifts, I get a tax credit for each additional shift that I do beyond 1 shift. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about. And so you don't necessarily have to be in the free zone to get those benefits. And we saw a lot of problems with the free zone, and we've tried to incorporate it in the incentive regime that we proposed.
Joy News missed out big time on the cost, and I know he'll be in trouble with his editors.
Okay,
so if you are feeling generous, you can do that for him again.
We said that the initial projected cost, we're still in the calibration stage, is about $4 billion US. Of that, about 300 to 400 million will come from government to support the viability gap requirement to make sure that the bulk infrastructure is commercially sound and therefore will attract private sector investment. Because government is involved in the IMF program, they have to test these suggestions to the IMF, and it doesn't have to be in one go. It can be a crawling seed, contribution of seed money to give, and also the requisite seed money for the authority when it's set up. So that is the ask, and we believe that we can raise a lot of that. In fact, some of the potential commitments you have already for the enterprise finance and the capex component of the bulk infrastructure and enterprise capex is heading now towards 2 billion. But it takes a little time to negotiate these. And of course, because they're confidential, we cannot immediately reveal until we've actually signed on the dotted line going forward. So by this time next year, we should be able to announce what kinds of resources are available to implement the program by the private sector. The money is not coming to 24-hour Secretariat. It's going through mechanisms straight to the private sector based on a very disciplined, well-thought-out protocols about who can benefit, why they benefit, whether they're in the value chains, whether they belong to an association, whether they are cooperative, and so on, so that we can build this extraordinary private sector we have to the levels that allows them to not only produce the low-hanging fruits. And the lowest hanging fruit we have, for those who ask the question, is the $2.5 billion of food we import from the rest of the world, which we can produce here. That is the lowest hanging fruit.
I think we are going away with a lot of fruits in our basket today. But let's do a quick clarification from you, Charles. And then we'll take one last question. I think at this point we should wrap up. And I have it from the gentleman here.
Okay, thank you. 2 quick additions. Our intervention approach is to work with farm clusters, which we are calling Agbledu. So the idea is that we concentrate efforts on an area where there are a lot of farms. So we're looking at where the support that we provide can benefit so many people. For example, if you have an anchor farmer, then the condition required is for him or her to have in-growers or outgrowers that can benefit from whatever support we give to the anchor farmer for it to trickle to all of them. Then my second point has to do with the very first question that Bernard Avler ask about the difference between what we are doing and the campaign slogan. I think there are no difference between the two. If you look at it in the context of the fact that we are looking at resetting the economy to have an economy that never sleeps. An economy that never sleeps. And that works for everyone every hour of the day. The idea is that if you look, let me use this example of a Western country where a janitor can buy a BMW and own a house because the economy is working for everyone every hour of the day. And that is what we are aspiring to, where everybody in this country, anywhere in the country, because we have an economy that is working and is not, and is not sleeping, can have the benefit of a decent life and decent income so that we can all be happy in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Osman Abador. I work with Radio Gold. Yes, when you were speaking, Mr. Tano, when you were speaking earlier on, you make mention about some families having issues with land. And so I just want to find out from you, how can government improve enforcement on land rights and policies to attract private investors, especially in the agri sector? I want to find out from you, once you've mentioned those things, going forward, what are you going to do, or what are you going to do to guarantee?
What is happening now is that the Lands Commission is trying to digitize the information on land and land titles. And there have been suggestions that one of the ways to secure land titles so that you don't have multiplicity of multiplicity of owners for the same land is actually to develop the land title system around blockchains, which is a public ledger that you cannot basically erase, So those are things going on. But because we know of the vast problems associated with land in this country, we chose a different route. And I'll let Nas explain the community land trust system that we're developing to ensure that title is secure, and therefore we won't have the levels of litigation and problems, and young people come to occupy the land and so on. So I'll let Nas explain the community trust system. But the government is making efforts through the Lands Commission to be able to create a database of land title, both its own, because government is quite a large owner of land. Its SOEs to are large owners of land, and it's important also that they also calibrate their land title so that is available and husband-led to invite investors to participate. And then also private land holdings, family land holdings, stool land holdings are also better calibrated so that it's predictability. An investor's most important criteria is the country I'm going to. Are the rules pertaining to my investment predictable and coherent? And another thing they look at is, how do you treat your own private sector? So your question is very important, and this is a short answer, but I think it's a very relevant question. And now so quickly, and I believe Charles too will explain the community land trust system. It's been tried before. It's nothing new. It's been done with rubber. It's been done with palm oil. Ours is slightly more sophisticated, but because we learned from what they're doing. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so I'll add to it very quickly. Like he said, this is a scheme that we basically studied what some of the mining companies have done, some others have done in other places, to ensure that we have a scheme that makes land easily available at a cost that is also manageable. So you realize that across the country, land is owned by either chiefs or families, but it depending on where you go. And part of the problem you have with accessing land is sometimes you have to deal with several families if you're looking for large tracts of land. And sometimes you go to the community, most land, they'll tell you to buy land, and the price, very huge amounts of money that people need to pay. So we've developed what we call the participatory land access model. And here, what we're then doing is encouraging communities to form community land trusts. The community land trust takes the land. So families and chiefs and whatever it is can then put their lands into this community land trust, which then takes a stake in the SPVs that will be setting up these businesses, so that the SPVs become the community land trust becomes the community's contribution to the business, to the SPV, and that gives them equity within the businesses. And then they can then get their returns, and the returns is what then they use for community projects, community improvements, and all of that. That way, what happens is that the land is actually then benefiting the communities, and it's also easy for businesses to come in and set up and do what they are doing without having to deal with so many families and all the complications that come with dealing with the traditional authorities and all of that. So that's the model that we are putting in place. And we have a land lawyer who is working with us to put it in place. And where's Joe? Joe is leading that process to, get the community land trusts going. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Was Joe going to say anything? Okay, Joe is fine. For our Kan-speaking stations, after the program, we'll make ourselves available for you so that we can answer a few questions that you have as well. That's how we wrap up today's edition. We would also want to plead with you that before, during, and after the launch, please make your platforms available to us to be able to spread the word about 24-hour economy. At this point, I'd like to welcome the coordinator, Mr. Chichi Opoku, to give us the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, colleagues, for coming here today, for listening so attentively and asking such insightful questions. We agree entirely with the comments that Koku made at the beginning, that the packaging of this program for many, many people has been 3 shifts, etc. But we would also point out that that packaging and that communication was itself to a large extent our creation, a creation of the media. It is the way that we interpret, internalize, and then re-export ideas that the public picks up on. Because it's not often possible for policymakers, leaders in different contexts to always explain in detail the ideas, the thinking behind different concepts. And because last year was an election year, a campaign year, it was easier for many people to boil messages down into simple, repeatable slogans, whether for or against. But the good news is that in the same way that we collectively created a certain understanding, we can also collectively correct, expand, and take forward our understanding of what it is Ghana needs to do in this moment, and how all of us, whether Secretariat or media or other institutions, can facilitate that process. And that's really what today's meeting has been about. Us trying to express to you the work we've been doing over the last 6 months, trying to explain to you what we think is possible, given just the brilliance of the Ghanaian people, what we are capable of. This is the first country south of the Sahara to win independence from colonial rule. We have been trailblazers before. We have built a largely industrial economy, at least compared to our neighbors before. We have done this thing. There have been many, many problems that we have solved working together, mobilizing together. And at the end of the day, the 24-hour program is a program of citizens' mobilization. It's about all of us putting our shoulders to the wheel and solving problems that we all know about. As Guzi said a few minutes ago, there's really
no single element in this program that is brand new, that is coming out of our heads. Volta Economic Corridor, Nkrumah dreamed it. Nkrumah actually put the infrastructure in place and created this lake. As far back as 1964, I'm sure almost all of you were not born then. It's not a new idea, but there are material reasons why, as a country, we have not been able to realize the non-power economies of the lake. And all of those reasons have to do with our internal divisions, our individual greed, our inability to look at the larger national interest and work together to achieve things. We have an opportunity to do that now. And it's an opportunity that we can't let slip. Because, again, listening to all of you in the media, it's very clear that if we don't take this opportunity to set things right now, the place that our country is heading to is a very, very dark place. It's not a place any of us want to go. But we need you to communicate these messages. We need you to explain. We need you to take us to task when we got it wrong, but to take us to task in a way that makes positive sense for the people of the country, you know. And so, again, we are very, very grateful that you came, that you've listened, and we hope that you go out to conquer. Also, a last word of thanks again to our hosts, okay, but also again to the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana has been a great supporter of our work as a secretariat and a great supporter of the program and what it can do for this country. A great supporter of a unified approach to economic development, in which you have the macro, you have the micro, you have the ingenuity of the people and the energy of the people brought together to achieve concrete gains. So we're very, very grateful to the leadership of the Bank of Ghana for consistently responding to our requests for assistance. Okay. Thanks to the Secretariat team. We're very, very proud of you all and the work you're doing. And I think that's about it. We hope to see you all on Wednesday. And as MFA said, we hope that you will continue to carry the message, keep us alive in people's minds as we go along. Thank you very much.
So really, we've come to the end of it. And thank you so much for being a part of it. And the Akan Media, please, we are ready for you. NASA speaks very good Chi. So he will take us through it. So if you are ready, we are ready for you. And I think you didn't finish your small chops, so you can finish it up and then we can wrap up. Thank you. It's lunch. Okay, so lunch is available. It's not just your small chops. There's lunch, okay? So eat well.